suffered so bad. I was really struggling to survive. Had a lot of trays that were attempted murder and everything. I had to wash all my food off.
What is the dark truth? Why do serial killers kill? The facts and myths. Serial killers are among the most terrifying and bizarre figures in society. What drives a person to do such evil things? Why do they target certain victims? And what's really going on in their minds? While there's no simple answer, a combination of psychological, biological, and social factors might explain why some people end up killing repeatedly. At the same time, there are a lot of misconceptions about serial killers and why they do what they do. Let's look at the main reasons behind serial killings, clear up some myths, and even touch on some ironic and even humorous details about these killers. So, what makes serial killers kill? Number 1. Psychological reasons. Many serial killers exhibit traits of psychopathy, which is characterized by a lack of empathy, guilt, and remorse. These individuals often show persistent patterns of antisocial behavior, grandiosity, and even manipulativeness. This lack of emotional connection makes it easier for them to commit violent acts without feeling bad. For some, the act of killing becomes something they enjoy or even get addicted to. For example, Ted Bundy. He's often considered a textbook case of psychopathy. He was known for his manipulative charm, lack of remorse, and ability to deceive others. His lack of empathy and emotional connection with his victims enabled him to kill at least 30 women without showing any remorse. A significant number of serial killers have endured severe childhood abuse, neglect, or abandonment. Such trauma can lead to emotional dysregulation and a distorted sense of self-worth, which contributes to their violent tendencies. Early trauma can lead to complex post-traumatic stress disorder or reactive attachment disorder, which can shape their interactions with the world and intensify feelings of powerlessness. Just look at Richard Ramirez, otherwise known as the Night Stalker. Ramirez was raised in a violent environment where he witnessed his cousin commit a murder and was physically abused by his father. This combination of trauma and exposure to violence contributed to his later violent tendencies. Some serial killers struggle with issues of identity formation, often as a result of early trauma or abuse. This can cause them to seek external validation or power through violent acts, attempting to solidify a sense of self by exerting control over others. John Wayne Gacy is a perfect example. Gacy, who had a fractured sense of identity, struggled with his sexual identity and societal expectations. He later sought control and validation by dressing up as a clown and committing murder, which was a way for him to feel empowered and in control. Number 2. Biological and neurological factors. Several serial killers exhibit abnormalities in the brain, particularly in areas such as the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for impulse control, decision-making, and emotional regulation. Dysfunction in this region can result in poor decision-making and the inability to control aggressive impulses, increasing the likelihood of violent behavior. Additionally, abnormalities in the amygdala, a part of the brain associated with emotional responses, can lead to heightened aggression or a diminished fear response. Eileen Wuornos was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder and borderline personality disorder and had a history of traumatic brain injuries that may have contributed to her violent behavior. Studies suggest that damage to certain brain areas can impair empathy and emotional control, both of which are important factors in serial killing. Genetic research suggests that certain inherited traits, such as impulsivity and aggression, may predispose individuals to violent behavior. However, genetics alone are not enough to explain serial killing. A combination of genetic predisposition and environmental stressors, such as abuse or social isolation, is often necessary for violent behavior to manifest. Gary Ridgway, also called the Green River Killer, had a brutal family history, and exposure to violence may have also contributed to his aggression. Some researchers suggest that certain personality traits, which can be inherited, may play a role in the development of violent behavior, although it's not always the sole factor. Number 3. Social factors. Many serial killers exhibit social isolation, which can exacerbate feelings of frustration, anger, and alienation. In some cases, this isolation may lead to a desire for attention or control. Social deprivation can lead to maladaptive coping mechanisms such as violence, which allows the individual to assert power over others. David Berkowitz, known as Son of Sam, had experienced social isolation during his childhood and later as an adult claimed that his loneliness and lack of meaningful relationships contributed to his murderous behavior. His isolation from society created a sense of alienation, and in his case, the killing seemed to provide him with a twisted sense of validation. The portrayal of serial killers in media often glorifies their actions, providing a form of validation for those seeking recognition or fame. Some serial killers intentionally commit their crimes with the hope of receiving media attention, as the desire for notoriety can serve as a driving force behind their actions. The Zodiac Killer's cryptic letters and taunting messages sent to the media indicate a desire for attention and recognition. The killer was highly aware of his media coverage and used it to maintain his mystique and power over the public. Repeated exposure to violence, particularly in the media and entertainment, can desensitize individuals to the moral and emotional consequences of murder. While not all individuals exposed to violent content become killers, the normalization of violent behavior can lower the psychological barriers to committing violence, particularly to those already predisposed to aggressive behavior. Jeffrey Dahmer is a prime example of a killer who had a fascination with death from a young age, and he grew up in an environment where violence was present. While his actions were more about control and sexual desire, there's evidence that his exposure to violent imagery and his disconnection from human life played a role in his killings. Now let's look at some common misconceptions about serial killers. There are a lot of myths surrounding serial killers, many of which stem from media portrayals or sensationalized accounts. Let's take a closer look at some of the most common misconceptions. Number 1. Serial killers are always psychopaths. Not all serial killers meet the criteria for psychopathy, which is diagnosed according to the psychopathy checklist. While psychopathy is a common trait among many serial killers, it's not universal. Some serial killers may have other mental health conditions or come from traumatic backgrounds, and their violent tendencies may result from complex psychological factors rather than a clinical personality disorder. Edmund Kemper, often cited as a psychopath, displays traits of both psychopathy and narcissism. However, his crimes were more rooted in his emotional instability and a disturbed relationship with his mother rather than pure psychopathy. Myth number 2. Serial killers are always driven by sexual desire. Sexual motives are present in many serial killings, but not all of them. Some serial killers are driven by a need for power, control, or a compulsion to eliminate a specific group of people. In some cases, the violence is not sexually motivated, but is rather asserting dominance over the victim, which aligns with traits of sadistic behavior. The Unabomber Ted Kaczynski was responsible for a nationwide bombing campaign. It wasn't motivated by sexual desire, but his belief in anti-technological ideology. His attacks were about asserting his views and inflicting damage, not sexual gratification. Myth number 3. Serial killers always work alone. Many do operate alone, but some have accomplices or people who assist them. It's important to remember that a killer's behavior can be influenced by social interactions and relationships. In cases of serial killings involving multiple perpetrators, the dynamics between the individuals involved can be quite complex. As for serial killer couples, there was Ken and Barbie, Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka. This Canadian couple worked together to abduct, torture, and murder multiple victims. While Bernardo was the primary perpetrator, Homolka played an active role, illustrating that serial killings can involve multiple people. Myth number 4. Serial killers are born evil. The idea that they are born evil oversimplifies the cause of violent behavior. Research in developmental psychology and criminology suggests that serial killers are often shaped by a combination of genetic factors, early childhood experiences, and environmental stressors. The belief they are inherently evil ignores the importance of understanding the psychological and sociological factors that contribute to violence. Albert Fish was often described as a sadistic killer, and he came from an abusive and neglectful childhood. His violent behavior didn't emerge from an innate evil, but from years of trauma and mental illness. Now let's take a look at some of the ironic and even dark humor. While the crimes themselves are horrific, there are some odd and sometimes even darkly humorous aspects to serial killers' behavior. These details provide a surreal contrast to the brutality of their actions. First, Ted Bundy's close call. Ted Bundy was pulled over by the police during a routine traffic stop in Utah. His car matched the description of one seen near a crime scene, but Bundy was able to talk his way out of the situation. This moment, when Bundy almost got caught, is an ironic twist given his later capture and the notorious legacy he built. Number 2. Gary Ridgway's urge to kill. Gary Ridgway, known as the Green River Killer, admitted that sometimes he had an urge to kill, but he would stop himself because he didn't want to kill too many. The irony here is that despite this self-restraint, Ridgway still murdered 49 women, suggesting a twisted level of control. Number 3. The Zodiac Killer's messages. The Zodiac Killer sent cryptic letters to the media, claiming he would stop killing if his codes were solved. Ironically, some of his ciphers were eventually cracked, rendering his attempt at mystery solving somewhat pointless. Number 4. John Wayne Gacy's pet dog. Despite his horrific crimes, John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown, had a pet dog named Minnie, and he was known to be friendly with his neighbors. The contrast between his loving behavior toward animals and his horrific crimes make for an eerie and unsettling juxtaposition. That just goes to show that just because they have a dog, it doesn't mean they are not a serial killer. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. If you haven't seen my other videos, check them out now. I have one about Chex and Kellogg's origins, which might just surprise you how dark they really are.